Hello, one, and hello all to episode two of Busy Playing Something. Probably one at this point. We're only two episodes in, so there's no all. It's just hello, one. But
Hello.
welcome to episode two of Busy Playing Something. I'm your host for today, Joshua LaRosa, joined by he only soon to be streaming everything, Sean Harron. Sean, how are you?
Oh, I'm good, thank you very much. Or I'd say good, but I'm a little bit sick at the moment, so my voice has gone down half an octave, but otherwise I'm okay.
You do sound like a late night radio host, something that you can imagine listening to on a long drive home.
Yeah,
Just that soothing voice.
it kind of feels a little bit like that. It's razor blades in the throat on my end, but yeah, I've had that for the last couple of days at work, and even people are mentioning, oh, are you putting on an accent or anything? It's like, no, no, no. This is where I'm at right now. If I have a day off, you'll know why.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is going around. It is winter here, or soon to be winter here in sunny Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. But we are an Australian podcast. We are episode two, live, soon to be live on YouTube, but currently pre-recorded YouTube and audio feeds. At the moment, it is just Spotify, but we're working towards Google and Apple in the near future. Again, episode two, we're still making our way through it. But plenty to talk about this week, including some Helldivers impressions from Sean, Hellblade 2, a lot of hell going on. Hellblade 2 review by yours truly. And we're going to talk a little bit about the all digital future, if it's something to celebrate or a reason to be concerned. But let's begin with what we have been playing. And Sean, a little bit of Helldivers 2 on the docket this week. Tell me about it.
Yes. Yeah, I have been playing a little bit, and I'm starting to really, get used to it. I'm playing with a couple of friends online, and we jump in every couple of days or so, and we're doing the level 9 missions, which are like the suicide missions, and it's not too bad. I'm starting to figure everything out, which is good. I'm running as a turret main, so now I'm throwing my turrets out and then not doing anything, and by the end of it I'll have 300 kills and like 20 shots fired, and everyone gets mad at me and I don't
Yeah.
even care.
It's really interesting. And I was smiling before. I don't know if it came through on the audio feeds, but Sean's cat
Yes. Yeah.
made
She's
a appearance. There's something funny about a cat noise. I don't know why. Like when a dog barks, it's annoying.
Well, if I move, you might be able to
Yeah.
see there's one over here in the hallway just staring at me, and the other one's floating around somewhere. She wants food, but she was fed a good, I don't know, hour ago. She's got more food coming in another 2.5 hours, so I don't know what's on with her, but they love it. They love it.
Yep. Well, I don't know. I'm not much of a cat guy, but then again, they make me sneeze. But Helldivers too. I think we spoke a little bit about it last week, but I'm genuinely surprised by how much the game has taken off. Right. I know it's kind of long been covered. The idea of like Helldivers 2 being a surprise hit for Sony and for people alike, and is that got something to do with day and date launch on PC? Yes, but there's just something so I think shareable about the game, right? Those little moments of the drop pod landing on you, you accidentally shoot someone, you're getting knocked off by one of those, I forget what the Hulk bugs, those big dudes that
There's Hulks and there's Chargers. There's a few different ones. Bio
charges, yeah,
Titans.
that send you across. So I like it's probably the first online game I've spent a long time in, besides Avengers. And that was a slog where I actually really enjoyed my time in Helldivers too. But yeah, is this something you think you'll keep playing? Is it something you'll have like kind of as your, that game that you just maybe not your main, but you go back to it every week or so? Or where do you see yourself with Helldivers?
At the moment, I think the gameplay loop is pretty engaging. So the idea that they have these major orders that come out every week, and they'll have personal orders that you'll need to do. So, for example, you kill 100 enemies with a flamethrower one week, or it might be with a different weapon the next week. So they do change it up a little bit, and the fact that the story is kind of ever changing, so there's always going to be a big bad boss down one end, and then okay, everyone's going to go to that planet and kind of liberate that planet, and then all of a sudden another one pops up. I think the changes that have happened to Helldivers 2 since its launch, so the player base has gone to just under 100,000, so it's nowhere near where we had at launch, and that's fair enough. That drop off always happens. You'll get the players coming back, and you'll get the part time players in a sense. They'll leave it alone because they've had their fun. They'll move on, and it affects the gameplay enough that they're able to kind of adapt to that. So, for example, one of the major orders last week was to kill a certain amount of the robots or the Terminators on those robot planets, and everybody failed that because
The player count.
the player, well, I would say the player count, because it didn't seem feasible in terms of your progress and how much you actually needed to do. So because of that player base drop and the fact that that major order was failed, now how are we going to kind of rebalance things? So now they're releasing a new patch, and that's actually like not nerfing, but it's actually buffing a couple of weapons to try and bring some of these players back, because they nerfed a few of the major players in terms of guns. So they're being very diligent in trying to get people to come back to the game and trying to get them back into that loop. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 6 months or so, whether or not we're going to see, any more other like expansions, what battle passes are they going to do, that sort of thing. I know there's going to be another race that was teased, I think, last year.
Yeah, there's an alien race, which I think they were the original enemies from the first Helldivers. And I think that's probably where you'll see the return of the player base, right? Where you bring out a new set of enemies, a new planet, new game type. At some point, we're going to get crossover in terms of outfits. Like, surely, like, where's the Kratos armor, or the Aloy armor, or the Ghost of Tsushima armor? Like, it just makes too much sense. But yeah, I'm glad to see Helldivers continue to do well. And
I do also want to point out as well that they had a change in CEO. So the CEO's actually taken a step back, and he's gone to be a COO and handle more of the actual, not the developers and that side of things, less so the marketing and the whole business strategy. And so now that's been fulfilled by someone else. So they want to stay independent. They want to remain independent. So it's going to be interesting to see how that next 6 months plays out, leading up to probably the end of the year, as to whether or not Helldivers is the same game that it is now.
yeah, well, they've grown immensely. I think when they developed the original game, there's maybe 20 or 30 of them, in the studio. Now that's grown well over 100. And yeah, to your point, the CEO stepped back, hired his own replacement, and he's taken a more hands-on role. And it'll be interesting to see, not to talk about acquisitions or anything like that, but you think of what makes sense, and Arrowhead makes perfect sense. Sony's been working with them since the original game over 10 years ago, nearly at this point, and has given them a lot of money too. Like, I think this game got rebooted, from my understanding, like tangentially around the game's development. The sequel of Helldivers 2 was going to be more of the same sequel, your expected top-down view. And Sony actually came to them with more money and said, hey, look, let's reboot it. Let's give you guys some more money and some more time, and let's see what you can come out with. Because the original game sold like 3 or 4 million copies, which for the time that it was being developed and launched in, and given the scale of the game, that was very successful. So there had to have been some sort of like recognizing the game's potential, given a little bit more time, a little bit more budget. So yeah, we'll be interested to see what happens with Arrowhead, and wishing all the team well. We are wearing our gaming apparel today, so you can tell we're definitely, true gamers. Sean's repping the Xbox hoodie, and I've got my my Shinra Power Company Final Fantasy VII t-shirt on, so you can definitely call us real gamers there in the comments. But let's move on. So the other launch that's happened over the last week or so, in Hellblade 2, keep thinking Helldivers, but it's another Hell. Hellblade 2 launching into Game Pass and on Xbox Series and PC. I did play the game on PC. Funny enough, I subscribed back to Game Pass for the month and to play the game, and I was able to finish it that quickly that I unsubscribed, and they actually gave me my money back for the month. So I don't know if that's a bit of a loophole or
you spend too much time playing games.
No, well, it's not like I played it all on one day, right? When did I download it? whenever it launched, the last few days. So it might have taken me 2 or 3 days to play, but I was surprised that I was offered the full refund. I thought maybe if you cancel your subscription that same day or whatever, fair enough. But I wasn't planning to. I wasn't doing it to get the money back. I just did it so it wouldn't lapse for next month, and I wouldn't have to think about it. But they're like, "Do you want a refund?" I'm like, "Well, I finished the game and happy to take my $10 back." So thank you, Microsoft. Don't know why
You got
subscriptions
paid
aren't
to play
working.
Hellblade 2.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, I did play Hellblade 2. I finished it today. A bit of an update from last week. So I formally resigned this afternoon. So it's no longer a secret. So it didn't leak from
Oh,
last week.
that's good.
It's a surprise to nobody. So I had a bit of time on my hands today. So I've literally just finished the game 4 hours ago at this point. So it's still very fresh in my mind. And what I wanted to do was kind of go through a bit of a review discussion of the game using we're going to use a 20-point scale, right? Because I think a scale out of 1 to 5 doesn't really give you that full breadth of understanding. Because everything's either a 3, like in that great area. It doesn't allow you to really use the full scale. So I think we will use, busy playing something, we'll use a 20-point scale, 1 to 10, and obviously half points as well. 10 being what we'll call a modern masterpiece, 9's amazing, 8's great, 7's good, 6 is okay, 5 is meh, 4's bad, 3's terrible, 2's unplayable, and 1's an actual dumpster on fire. I don't expect we'll have too many games in maybe that first 1, 2, or 3, but you never know. Another Golem game could come out and Sean's downloading that on Game Pass, and then all of a sudden we've got something that's
have you
an
played
actual...
the Golem game?
No.
I have not. I'm waiting for it to come to Game Pass. It'll be a free game on the Epic Store.
It'll be free on something.
It's bound to be.
Bound to be. So, for full context, like I said, I've played the game. Sean hasn't. So we're going to allow Sean to take the driver's seat in the discussion and launch the questions at me. But yeah, anywhere you'd like to start off first, Sean, or you want me to just kick into it?
Okay. So as far as I'm aware, the game follows the story from the first. So the first question would be, do you need to have played the first game in order to play the second?
There is a continuation of the story. So I have played, for full context, I have played the original Hellblade, which was actually a PlayStation exclusive at the time. And the story does continue, but the story itself is so... Not it went over my head, but it isn't like a clear narrative. So even though I had played the first one, and this was years ago, there is when you launch the game, there is like a few minute recap of the first game in there, built into the game, which is appreciated. But I don't think you necessarily need to play the first game to play the second one. Would you get more enjoyment out of it? Yes. But I actually found that playing the first game, there was some differences I noticed between the two that really brought down my enjoyment of the game, which I'm happy to touch on later. But to answer your question, it always helps, but I don't think it's needed.
Okay. And so I know that the runtime for this seemed pretty short. It sounded like maybe a 10-hour game or so, around that mark.
Yeah, even slightly less. I think my timer was about 6.5 hours. I've seen some people say they've finished it in less than or just over 5 hours. I've seen people say it could take up to 8. It's definitely a shorter experience, and I think when you look at the gambit of reviews online, you're seeing a real mix, right? You're seeing 10s and 9s, and then you're seeing 5s and 6s. So I definitely don't think the game's for everybody, and it's being reviewed. It's funny, like the game's being reviewed from like these different scopes. Some people, the real way it should be reviewed is as a standalone game as is. But I have seen that, and then I've also seen the game being a reflection of Xbox and Game Pass, and what does it mean for this, and that's a different layer of the conversation, which unfortunately now that Ninja Theory are a first party, that's going to come up. And then the third level is like the PlayStation guys reviewing it, giving it like a 2, and then the likes of like any reviewer with Xbox in the title giving it a 10. So this game is kind of muddled in, I think, 3 different levels of conversation. But I do think that this game isn't for everybody. So off the top, my review score for the game, I would land at a 7. Right? I think I can make a case for 6.5. So between okay and good. But I think at the end, when I put down the game, I moved to a 7 for the fact that I would recommend at least trying this game out. Now, it's a recommendation not to say that, hey, play this, you will like it. It's a recommendation to say, hey, this is different enough. It's graphically impressive. It's a different audio experience with the style of game that it is, that it's worth playing even if you don't really walk away enjoying it so much, but you've at least had the experience. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. It kind of that it kind of leads to more towards my next question, which would be, do you think this is less of a game and more of a work of art?
Yeah, and the first game was like that too. Uh, I think where it gets a bit muddled, whatever the right word is this game was announced alongside the Series X console announcement, right? So at the time, it was kind of positioned as, hey, we purchased Ninja Theory. The first game was this 5-6 hour epic, and now they're under Microsoft, and we're gonna blow this out to be like a full AAA experience. It wasn't until much later, towards the launch of the game, that we learned that, hey, no, we're keeping it small scale. It's going to be similar length to the first game. And then people's expectations started to get put into check. But there's no denying, I think, graphically, this game is like... I'm playing on PC, like I said earlier, and I haven't got this amazing rig, and my monitors aren't anything too crazy. And the game is visually, like, some of the best looking graphics I've ever seen. But that does come with some flaws. I think the game is very much on rails. So you're in open spaces, but you can't just walk off the path, for instance. So it is, in some ways, you are kind of going down
It's very linear.
Very linear. Very, very linear. So I've seen people compare this to, like...
Final Fantasy 13.
No, it's from a scale perspective,
Okay.
like The Order 1886 or
Okay, yeah.
Rise, Son of Rome, right? And I do think games like Rise, Son of Rome and The Order are better games because there's a lot more gameplay there. This is, like you said, more of an experience, more geared towards being an art, piece of art. Where I see some of the negatives coming in, though, I think from a gameplay perspective, there really isn't too much going on. There's a lot of walking, there is combat sections, and then there's puzzle sections, and then there's the walking and talking. The puzzles themselves are basically the same puzzles that were in the first game. So there wasn't much work, I think, done. It's like 80% of the development was focused on graphics and audio design. And then they're like, shit, we need to put a game together. And that's where you see a lot of the similar puzzles that are there in the first game. So a lot of walking around and matching up different icons. Gameplay, as in the fighting mechanics, I think some have said it's a bit of a step back. Sorry, I'm choking here. I'm just going to put myself on mute and cough my lungs out.
No, that's okay. Gee. It's one of those days down here in Melbourne, I guess. You just need to be able to empty the throat, all that sort of stuff. I've got some nice no sugar cola here, so I'm not sure what Josh is doing, but
just Coke, no sugar. Sorry about that.
oh, yeah, we're on the same page then.
So from a combat perspective, the game's actually paired back from the original. So the first game had, your one-to-one combat, but then as different enemies would appear on screen, you'd hear the voices in Senua's head saying, "Oh, behind you," or "You need to move to the left," and "Dodge right," and all those different things. And you also had a button to kick through shields and break up combat that way. This game doesn't have any of that. It's a lot more like you face an enemy one-on-one, and you'll kill that enemy. Then there's a really cool transition where, like, Senua will get grabbed and thrown to the ground, and then you start that combat with the second enemy.
Yep.
I actually enjoy the combat more in this game. As much as it is definitely paired back, it's just light attack, heavy attack, parry, and then you've got this mirror that can basically slow down time, and it lets you kind of get a quick hit in. So the gameplay is dialed back, but I think where I've landed, that 7 score is like what I said. It's the experience itself. From an audio perspective, Senua's hearing these voices in her head throughout the game, and I was playing it with my, PlayStation 3D audio headset.
Yeah.
So I was getting that 3D audio come through, and it is really cool where you're just walking and you hear like the whispers going through your head, and the sound design from when you're traveling across landscapes and the lightning and the rain and the fire. It's all, like I said, an experience. Is this much of a game? That's up to the eye of the beholder. There will be people who will play this and not think much of it. There might be people who play it and think it's amazing and think it's a 9 or a 10. I just think the game's worth experiencing. So that's where I've landed at that 7.
And so, does it make sense that this game did not have a physical release?
Good point. And we're going to talk about digital games a little bit later. But it's hard. I mean, this game's kind of not put out to die, but just think about it this way. It's a sequel to a game that was a PlayStation exclusive, that isn't launching physically, that had the whole 6-hour narrative take wind prior to the game's launch.
Sounds like it's a one and done game.
Oh, well, apparently they've already got a green light for a new game, and it's probably going to be a third game in the series. But it's more the point I was trying to make is more. This game had a lot of hurdles, right? A lot of barriers to break through. It needs to break through the idea that maybe a lot of the fan base on Xbox hadn't played the first one because it was on PlayStation first, but it did come to Xbox later. So there's that. Then it's not physical and it's short. So it'll be interesting to see. Little white cat in the background. Yeah. Be interesting to see where it lands and what the player count is, and we're not going to get sales figures because Microsoft don't typically do that. But you know, the fact that they've got a greenlit sequel or new game in development's good. But yeah, I just find it had to have gone through a lot of hurdles to kind of hit the fan base, is what I'm trying to say.
Do you feel like this game's going to become a commercial success for what it is, or do you think that it's just going to do what it needs to do, or even less than that?
That's difficult to say because it's hard to get real data. You can kind of go off Steam numbers, and if you do go off Steam, it isn't doing too well. But I do think this is a game most Xbox and PC players, I would assume, or most Xbox players anyway, will be using Game Pass to play it. But I don't see this being a commercial hit at all. And the first one wasn't, but kind of was. It was a bit of a sleeper hit that
like
sold
an indie
well.
darling sort of thing?
Yeah, because that's the thing. At the time, it was an indie game, right? It was beautiful, all that, and sold reasonably well. This game's been in development for like 6, 7, 8 years. And probably got a bit of a boost when Microsoft purchased Ninja Theory in 2018, but the game's been in development for a very long time, so it wouldn't have been cheap. So, yeah, commercially, I don't think this is going to be a big success for Xbox or for anybody. Just hope it does what it needs to.
Okay, so then I guess this is probably my last question. It's probably going to lead into the next topic that we're going to talk about. Does this feel like a Game Pass game?
I mean, it does. And maybe this is what Game Pass needs. Maybe, the data shows that the completion rates on games are less on Xbox. Especially for games on Game Pass. You look at even games that have launched from Xbox, right? In Pentiment and Hi-Fi Rush and the others on PlayStation. The completion rates are higher on PlayStation. So what that tells me is when these games typically launch into a service, people will go in, a portion of people will play the game through to completion, but there's a large portion of people who will play an hour or play the opening level and then bounce if they don't feel like the game's working for them. Which is different for people when you purchase a game because you've you most of the time have done a bit of research, have an understanding of what the game is, and you've spent $60, $70 on it, so you tend to want to see it through. So, what was your question?
Isn't that an interesting reflection then of what Game Pass actually provides? Because you can jump in for that hour or two, and there's no monetary, sunk cost fallacy involved in the game. You can just move on to the next game. Whereas if you're buying it outright on PlayStation, yes, you've bought it, so you're more likely going to be able to play it through, or more likely going to want to play it through to completion.
Yeah, and and to go to your question, is it a great Game Pass game? I think short games might be the answer, right? Games that can be launched quick, get these teams not spending 5, 6, 7 years on a game, but if they can launch something every 2, 3 years, it's shorter in scale. I think 5, 6 hours is a little bit short. 10 to 15 hours is probably the sweet spot. But if the numbers and the data showing that most people aren't finishing games to completion, it doesn't matter if your game's 10 hours or 50 hours. So if they can make games shorter and have people play through them more, maybe that's the path, and they can just keep feeding Game Pass whilst making these games cheaper to develop because they're not taking as long. Potentially. I don't know if I believe that, but that could be a thinking that people might have.
Okay, so if I'm somebody and I'm looking at Game Pass, I don't feel like from what you're saying that I'm looking at Game Pass to play Hellblade 2. However, it would be nice to have that as an option.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think this game's going to move Game Pass subscribers, but existing subscribers might be worth picking up and playing.
Alright, so I guess in the grand scheme of things, as an Xbox exclusive, does it really matter?
No, and I actually think this will be one of the games that comes across to PlayStation in the near future. So you've heard it here first. We'll see.
Yeah, you reckon it'll make it across to PlayStation purely because it's not going to do necessarily what Xbox wants it to do, so therefore it's better to expand the market, expand the consumer base, sell it on PlayStation for maybe $40-$60 Australian, so we're looking at a 30 to 50 US game, and at least then try and get other people to play it.
Yeah, I think so. And again, the first game was an exclusive, so there is that lineage on PlayStation anyway.
Well,
And
it's not too much of an exclusive, it's on Xbox now.
yeah, it was a timed exclusive at the time. So maybe there's the feeling that, well, there's probably an audience on PlayStation already. This game isn't moving hardware anyway. I mean, at this point, we've heard in the news this week that the new Doom game's launching day and date on PlayStation and Xbox. There's rumors that Gears of War collection's coming to PlayStation, which will be wild to see.
Yeah, that's wild.
So if that's happening, what makes Hellblade 2 any different?
Yeah, I feel like if you're gonna move Gears of War to PlayStation, games like Hellblade, they're in the chamber. They're ready to go. You're not gonna hold on to that as an Xbox exclusive, thinking that people are gonna come to Xbox for that when you're sending one of your big three, I would say, in Gears of War over to PlayStation.
Exactly. But yeah, let us know in the comments what you guys think of Hellblade 2. It'd be interesting to see what you think, and maybe perhaps Sean will get to it at some point. We can hear his thoughts and see if it differs from mine.
I'll play through the first one first.
Yeah, you can finish both of them obviously pretty quickly. But another thing we wanted to touch on today, and this is kind of going to be the main topic for today's episode, is talking about the all-digital future. Speaking of Hellblade 2 being a digital-only game. And the idea of if it's something we should be celebrating or is it a cause for concern for gamers. So before we get into any of that, I wanted to go through some of the key data points that I've found online. So in 2023, digital sales made up a whopping 95% of all game revenue in 2023, which is equivalent to $174.5 billion. So a few caveats in that. US. Few caveats in that. This includes game sales, DLC, in-game purchases. It includes console, PC, and mobile, where PC and mobile are all mostly digital. So it is skewed, but just again paints the picture of how big digital is. But let's look at the hardware. Let's look at the big three console makers and make a bit more sense out of it. So at the higher end of the scale, in terms of physical sales, Nintendo Switch saw 55% of their games sold physically in 2023. PlayStation, both PS4 and PS5, had a split of 70% digital and 30% physical. And Xbox Series, the data is a little difficult to pull. And keep in mind, Series S is purely digital, so that's going to skew the data as well. But it's estimated to be anywhere between 80 to 90% digital. So let's stop there before we get any further into the conversation. Let's start with our friends in Japan and with the Mario cap on, our dear friends, Mr. Nintendo. Switch, 55% physical. Does this shock you at all? What's your thoughts on that split?
Absolutely not. I still work in a physical retail game store, and the Switch is the highest selling console for software out of all three by a long shot. Like, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, we talk about how popular they are in brick and mortar stores, and Xbox is, lagging behind because of Game Pass and whatever other reason. But Switch dominates. When you're buying
Yeah.
a game on Switch, you are buying most likely physical, a lot of digital games, because Nintendo still don't know what the internet is and they're still trying to figure that out. People don't have the trust to be able to purchase their games digitally, knowing that they're going to be able to have access to it on other platforms. Whereas for PlayStation and Xbox, they have that facility available. So a lot of people are buying physical games on launch for Switch, and that's where all those sales are going. So that 55% physical, that makes a lot of sense to me, because you've got to keep in mind that brick and mortar stores selling games have dwindled over the last 10, 15 years. It's gone down a lot. So the fact that 55% physical still for Switch, in the grand scheme of things, especially with DLC and everything else added into it, that's huge.
And I think with Nintendo in particular, there's like a few other avenues as to why I think physical remains so popular. I think, firstly, it's the collector market. Nintendo games are notorious for not ever going on sale.
Yep.
You go to buy Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, and it's still more expensive now than it was when it launched on Wii U.
I'm waiting for the price
Uh,
drop.
Yeah, so I think both physically and digital Xbox, Nintendo games tend to hold their value. So there is that avenue. And I think the other avenue as well is their games launch. The, the cartridge themselves holds the game, right? Like actually has the game. Most of their games you can play without updating or anything like that. They will have day one patches or things like that, but it's very different to, I think, when like Halo Infinite launched and there was 20 gig on the disc and the other 150 was all downloaded, right?
The equivalency of the game being available on the hardware for Switch games, like in terms of Nintendo, they're all about, their pride in having finished products, and so most of their games are finished when they're launched, and it's just like little technical stuff that's on day one.
Yeah, so from an ownership perspective, I think there's that level of comfort that when you're buying physically on Nintendo, you're buying the game, which the other two platform holders don't necessarily have. And I think Nintendo just has that history, the buyer base. We always think that Nintendo skew young, which they do, but it's clear that a lot of the Nintendo fans are fans from the 80s, right? From NES, SNES, through to 64, GameCube, all the way through. So that does play a role in it too. That the older, our generation and above, tend to skew physical still. Sean clearly does, to some degree. But we'll talk about how that might be changing with some of your platforms as well. But makes sense. All right, PlayStation, 70% digital, 30% physical. What do you think of that?
I understand that. I think PlayStation's marketing, especially on the console itself, is pushing a lot towards its storefront, and not only that, but the PlayStation Plus subscription service. So there's like a sale on at the moment for like almost your mid-year sale in a sense, up to 50-70% off games.
Other days of play. Yeah.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. I think, especially with how PlayStation has been able to get that backwards compatibility for PS4 and PS5, that's helped them and their exclusives. Obviously, it's another story with the PlayStation 3. They still haven't figured that thing out. But otherwise, there is a push for that online service, because most people nowadays, when you're playing a PlayStation, any sort of home console besides maybe a Nintendo Switch, you're connected to the internet. And so why would you go into a brick and mortar store and buy a game brand new when you can get it on the digital store, and there's potential, if it's on sale, to get it for $15-20 less?
Yeah. And I think the Australian market is very different. We've spoken about it to death. The physical cost of a game is often cheaper than the digital launch for Australia. Where in other markets like the US, it's usually the same.
Yeah.
$60 US or $70 US, $70 digitally as well, where we tend to pay more for whatever reason digitally. So,
Importing.
yeah. And I'm not surprised to see the split as well. I think 30% is still, like, it'll be interesting to see where it stops, right? Like, it's never going to get to 100% digital unless they stop making physical games. And I do think that there's still value in having physical products, physical store presence. So I'm interested to see where that lands. Because I think out of the three, Nintendo obviously were going to continue to push physical. Uh, PlayStation is probably the second on that list to somewhat still want to support
Well,
physical.
PlayStation is
And then,
still PlayStation's still a major sponsor of EB Games in terms of like
yeah.
even their uniform. They've got more of a shop front in an EB Games store than say Xbox does.
And I
So
think it's because PlayStation really still rely heavily on that physical presence for their console sales.
yeah,
So there isn't really a way. I think you lose a bit of the magic not being able to purchase the hardware in store. And as much as the conversation we'll have today is about digital games are coming, digital's the future, physical games will shrink, the conversation is separate to are consoles going to go away? And consoles were deemed dead prior to PS4's launch. That was what all the predictions were, that, this could be the last console and consoles are dying and all that. I think if anything, we've proved out that there is still a place for a piece of hardware that sits under your TV that plays games. Will that move to more of a PC architecture? Sure, probably, but I still think consoles are still going to be around. Sony still want to sell controllers. Sony still want to sell PlayStation Portal. No, they don't want to sell VR too, but they're always going to have hardware that they want to push. So for them, there's the benefit of having that big. You walk into the store and there's that big presence of physical merch, the consoles themselves, and then the games. So it doesn't surprise me. I still purchase all my PlayStation games physically. I understand that there is some of those games that, like we said with Halo, maybe launch and only a portion of the games there. But then there's also the second-hand market that exists mainly on PlayStation and Xbox, but more on PlayStation now that most of the series stuff is going Game Pass and digital. That's there, and there are people that live in that ecosystem where they'll buy a game and trade that in for the next game, and that's how they keep in in playing the modern games. So doesn't surprise me at all. Again, interested to see where that lands, whether like there's a cutoff at like 85% or 90%, and then that other 10% is people like me and you that just tend to buy physically and will continue to do that because we like the collection and we like having a physical representation of our games. Not you can tell, not in this room. I don't play games in here. I've got a theater room that I spend most of my time in that houses all my games. So yeah, let's move on to the series consoles. 80 to 90% digital. No surprise here. What are your thoughts? Obviously, that's going to be driven by Game Pass, xCloud, and some of their games, like Hellblade 2, we touched on before, just not having a physical version for sale. But take it away.
I think most people nowadays, especially when they're buying Xbox games, if they're not getting them through Game Pass, if they're buying third-party games, because they're being conditioned to play digitally through Game Pass, more people are buying them digitally. And when you have people buying games physically for Xbox nowadays, it's all secondhand games. They're not buying brand new games. They're buying the secondhand games because they're a lot cheaper than what the PlayStation games would be. So the figures there, the 80 to 90% digital for Xbox, that makes a lot of sense to me because most people, they're getting to the stage where they're conditioned as an Xbox owner to have everything on the box. You don't have, a wall of games or anything like that. You don't need to buy the exclusives because they're all going to come on Game Pass. If you're already invested in that ecosystem, then you're already sold.
Exactly. And the barrier of entry is low, like you said before, right? If you're there, you might as well try out the new thing. I wanted to talk about hardware and how that's going to affect the transition to digital. We know Nintendo are likely to announce the Switch 2 at any point, most likely launching next year. That is said to be somewhat backwards compatible. 99.9% will be launching with physical media. PlayStation 5, we had the refresh, which dropped the disc player being built into the system itself, but to kind of supplement that, Sony are selling the disc drive separately, and that can fit directly into the new PS5 Slim. And then Xbox are rumored to have an all-digital Series X SKU launching later this year, and obviously Series S is all digital. So that kind of paints a picture of the landscape. Let's touch on PlayStation, because I think the Xbox narrative, the story, the progression is quite clear. Series S is all digital. Xbox Series X is likely to go digital. Subscription is their model, and subscription's all digital. So I think it's pretty obvious the path that they're going down. PlayStation's a little interesting. So I suspect Pro will launch similar to what the Slim is, where it's digital, and the disc drive that you can buy now will be the same disc drive that will connect into the PS5 Pro, because the disc drive doesn't change in the hardware. It's more the other parts, the other components that they're going to be different, right? Better CPU, all that tech stuff. So what are your thoughts on this approach? Like, for me, I think this is like the perfect scenario, where it's like, we get it. Most people play digitally these days. The console will launch digitally, and that means we can lower the cost and increase the hard drive space. Then the people like us who want to buy physically will make a disc drive and put a slight premium on it. And if you want to continue to buy games physically, you've got the option. For me, I think that's perfect, right? It's a lot better than just moving all digital, and it's like, well, hey, hold on. I've got thousands or hundreds of games that I've purchased physically, and now my console doesn't have a disc drive. What does that mean? What are your thoughts? Can you think of other ways that it could be done? Do you think there's better ways of doing it, or do you agree?
Well, I think we haven't necessarily come full circle, but it's definitely been a massive change from 10, 11 years ago, when we were hearing about the Xbox One and how it was going to be all digital. And so now, like, that was an option where, we want it to be digital. We're going to take it to be digital. Whereas most people were physical at the time, and they wanted digital as an option, not the primary way to go. Whereas, was the understanding, and again, it's been 10 years since Xbox One, it wasn't so much that they wanted to go digital, it was that they wanted that DRM function, right? That you'd put your disc in, and the disc would act as a key to unlock the digital game. Therefore, you couldn't just trade the disc, right? Because every disc would be locked to that console. Correct.
And you'd have to put
And so, basically, it was forcing you to be digital.
Yeah.
But there was a physical element to it.
But it killed off the secondhand market, right? That proposed solution would be that your disc is now useless unless it's being pushed into your system.
Yep. And so, it killed the secondhand market. Whereas now, 10, 11 years later, we're now saying that digital is going to be the primary option, and now physical is going to be the secondary option. So it's going to be driving you towards that digital content, whether it's games or subscription services and everything like that. But if you want to have the option of being able to purchase your physical games, then as PlayStation's doing, they're allowing you to buy that disc drive separately, so that way you can continue to use physical media. Now, funnily enough, I actually had a guy come into work yesterday, and he bought a game, and he unprompted started giving me a little spiel about how he buys games physically. He only buys games physically because then he owns the game. Because if the systems turn off, then his digital game's not gone. Yada yada yada. And then he pulled out his card and paid for it on card. And I'm like, okay, so you're picking and choosing, because isn't that the same thing with money? Why don't you use cash?
Yeah.
So I think that people are still in that element of, it's mine if I physically hold it, and therefore it is mine. Not necessarily it's digital, I have a license to use it, therefore it's not really mine. I'm technically buying to be able to rent it indefinitely until, the console system or whatever shuts down.
Or the disc breaks, or disintegrates.
Or whatever that is. And I think that's a mindset that we've had for a long period of time, because we haven't had digital for a long period of time in the grand scheme of things. It's always been, you physically hold it in your hand, it is yours. Where something that's in the ether, something that's online, it's not necessarily translatable to something that you own. And this is a conversation that you can have regarding, MMOs,
music, movies,
music, movies, online games, and DLC. like the Sword of a Thousand Truths in World of Warcraft. Like it's all digital. You don't necessarily own it.
Yeah.
However, you have a license to be able to use it. And while we're still in that mindset, a physical option is the best thing for consumers because you still need to wean them off the fact that, okay, we get it, you like your physical media, however, you've got to start moving to the new age. You want some space in your house, okay, well, if you go digital, it's all in the one box. Or, some people might have Xbox on their Samsung TV. They've got the app, they just need a controller, they don't even need a box. And so PlayStation, in terms of this rumor of having a digital pro console and then having a CD drive as a disc drive as a separate purchase that you can have as an accessory, yeah, one might think, okay, well, now you're making me buy something that I already have access to in my current consoles. Yeah,
Mm.
you could take it from that perspective, but the real perspective is we're moving towards digital whether you like it or not. However, here's an olive branch. You can
Yeah.
still use the games that you have, and you can still purchase physical media that you have. However, it's going to be detached to the console. It's separate. It's plugged in with a cable. Don't get too attached to it.
Yeah, that could
Things are
be the
going to
future of it.
change.
Yeah, it might get to the point now where, similar to I think the Xbox, where it had the 360 had the drive that was separate to the console, right?
The
PlayStation
HD
solution.
DVD drive, which I
Yeah,
actually have one.
there you go. So PlayStation solution's obviously a lot more integrated, but that's not to say that it will always be that way. The other thing I wanted to touch on as well is game preservation, right? So we heard of the news last year that is it Best Buy that was dropping physical DVDs, Blu-rays, and music,
Yes.
right, from their stores. And that's something that they've said that won't affect the video games, but it's just interesting to see what's happening.
Yeah.
So from a great game preservation perspective, where do you stand on, you know, digital games? So to paint the picture, a digital game could exist today and may not exist tomorrow. It may be on a storefront today, not on a storefront tomorrow, and this can kind of connect in with, the Wii and 3DS store closing. Microsoft announced the 360 store is closing in July, and Sony last year had announced PS3 and Vita stores were closing, but they stepped back on that due to some backlash from PS3 fans online that really wanted to play
All
Infamous.
four of them.
Yeah, wanted to play Infamous Festival of Blood. So where do you see, uh, from a game preservation perspective, what do gamers, what do the industry, what do governments, what do the people need to do to ensure that if this is coming, which it is, how we can ensure that games are still being preserved for future generations?
So I feel like as an industry, we're already behind by a long way. At the end of the day, a game, when it's made and released, you would like to be available to consumers and players anytime. I'm not saying anywhere, but anytime. If it's released on a singular platform, fair enough. But at some stage, you talk about sunsetting. And so there's been some games, I actually went through my Steam library over the weekend, and there's a few games that had actually sunset. And so they closed servers last year. And so
Yep.
that got me thinking, well, hang on a second. You're not going to have like an offline mode. Oh no, the servers are too hard, yada, yada, yada. That's for online games, sure. And
Yeah.
that's something we can cover a little bit later. But in terms of single player games, over the last, 45 years, since 1990 even, or 1985, there needs to be a way where, and this is probably going to change in terms of licensing, and I'm not sure if this is a government thing or this is something else, but there needs to be almost like a licensing agreement where after a period of time, if the game is not available on a modern platform, so whether that's mobile, PC, a console, whatever, it needs to go into a particular archive.
Yeah.
And
I
if
agree.
you've got all the files, put it in that archive. And there are some, sites online that you can go to these archives, and yes, it is illegal and all that sort of stuff. Because of the laws of what they are now, but in terms of game preservation, I think it's extremely important because at the end of the day, there's a game that, might find a new audience, or it might find a new sequel, or it might find a new reboot, and nobody's going to be able to play the original one because it's lost to time. Whether that's, because it's only available on PlayStation 3, maybe it was only available on the Sega Saturn. You don't
Yeah.
know.
There's a game, it's escaping me. I think it was a Mega Man game, or it might even been, I don't know why Kingdom Hearts is jumping to my mind, but there was a game where the developers lost the code for the game. So that happens as well. I think,
Well, it actually happened with Toy Story 2.
yeah,
So
like where
so the Toy Story 2, when they were making Toy Story 2, about three-quarters of the way through production of the film, somebody accidentally deleted all the servers. And so they lost everything for Toy Story 2. However, one of the staff members actually had all the files on a disk drive at their house, which was illegal at the time. They shouldn't have had that.
yeah,
However, because they had that copy at their house and were able to bring it back in, they were able to complete the film. But that goes
yeah.
to show how important preservation and effectively backing up
Yeah,
games are.
100%. And the point I wanted to make, and I think this is something that's done currently with books in certain countries, that when a book is published, a physical copy of, even if the book's never launching physically, a physical copy of the book or the movie or whatever it is sent to
The archives.
whoever, the archive
The
people.
National Archives or whatever it is.
Yeah. So maybe that's an option where every game that launches a physical, it doesn't need to be a disc, but a physical item, USB, whatever it is.
But are you sending the game itself with the bugs that it has, or are you sending the code? Because that's where the legal tendencies come into play.
Yeah, and that's where it's a little different to like a book, right? Because a book's not getting patched day one and it's not coming to you broken. So that's a answer that they'll need to solve for. But maybe some sort of solution like that once a game, I don't know, maybe once a game is at a state deemed okay, a physical copy sent to these archiving people and it's just kept there. I do also think piracy, as much as it is illegal, has a role to play as well because there are games that are lost to time that are just no longer available for licensing reasons or whatever on modern hardware. Even some games like even recent games, like I think of the Platinum Activision published like the Transformer games.
Mother 3, Japan only.
Yeah, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games, the Spider-Man games, those are lost to time. So preservation from a from an archiving perspective and piracy does have a place to play in that. And look, my view on piracy, I think personally, if you want to play a game and it's not available, they're not selling it to you. I don't think there is a harm in
There is no legal avenue to obtain the game.
Yeah.
And play the game.
Yeah, exactly. And that counts if you don't have the hardware, right? If you don't have a Switch, you shouldn't necessarily be downloading Metroid Dread. But if Nintendo are not selling you Metroid Dread, as in it's not available on their next hardware and it's lost to time, then, I mean...
Alright, so I'm going to put you on the spot here then.
Yeah.
So, okay, Ghost of Tsushima requires a PlayStation login in order to be able to play on PC, which means that it's barred from about 79 different countries, and we covered this last week. But because it's barred from those countries because they can't log into a PlayStation account, do you think that piracy should be involved for those players to be able to play that game? They have no other legal way to be able to play it because they can't play it on PlayStation.
Yeah, there are only other options like to create an account with a different VPN.
Which you can't do that because that breaches PlayStation's terms of service.
Yeah. At that point, yeah. And that kind of goes back to what I said last week where I said I don't necessarily agree with this, but just because an item exists doesn't mean you should be necessarily have the right to purchase it. On the other hand, on the other side of that same coin is, well, if they're not going to sell it to me, they can't take my money anyway, even if I wanted to give it to them. So I think that does land in a grey area where I personally wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, would I do it? If I really wanted to play Ghost of Tsushima and like you're not selling it to me, well, so be it. I mean, I'm not here to, wave the piracy flag. I don't even know how to download a game.
No, you don't.
So, I don't personally do it. But actually, I did. So this is an example when I went through my Metroid Dread like phase when I was like Metroid everything. I wanted to play. This was before. I actually don't know if it's available on Switch currently, but the 3DS remake of the first game, right? So the original Metroid. So the layers I go through with that was I could go and buy a 3DS and a copy of the game.
You're talking about the original Metroid, yeah?
Yeah, so I'm talking
Okay.
about the 3DS remake of the original Metroid. So it was a
Okay.
3DS game.
So
Okay.
just the remake. Okay, cool.
Just the remake, yeah. So I could have gone back and purchased the 3DS and then found the game for exorbitant amount of money on eBay and wouldn't benefit Nintendo in the slightest, right? Because I'd be paying for a second-hand hardware and a second-hand game. The console and the game itself has been sold. They've already got their money from that. So the only other option was to pirate the game. And I did, right? And I didn't feel in that moment, I didn't feel morally wrong. There's that grey area, but again, it wasn't available on modern hardware. Nintendo weren't selling it, and Nintendo are notorious for like, let's just hold this game and then we'll sell it on the next generation and then not make it available after that and then do it again. So I don't know how I did it because I don't know how I got an emulator running on PC, but I got that game running because I wanted to play Metroid. But what resulted in that was me then buying, the Prime remake and being more of a Metroid fan and then future investing. So there's a time and place, I think.
Could have asked me. I've got the original Metroid on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yeah, I mean, I could have done that as well. Like, I've got the NES remake, the mini. I think it's even on there, but
I think it's on
want
there, yeah.
I didn't necessarily want to play the original in its original state. I was like up for a bit more of a modern experience. But I want to talk about personal preferences.
Okay.
Obviously, you've got a big background of physical games in front of you, but have you, as time's gone on, have you, like, sometimes I look at my physical PlayStation games, and I 99% of the time play on PlayStation. 95%. I will play my Switch for exclusives, and then jump onto PC for an Xbox game if I want to. And I do look and I kind of go, all right, how many games? I don't count PS1 and 2 because I sold my collection. I've had to slowly purchase them back, so it's not a real representation of what I had. And at the time, I was literally 5 years old, so I wasn't out there buying games, so it's not really a fair calculation. I look at PS3 as the first generation, and it kind of was and wasn't, right? Because PS3 came out, I was in grade 6, and I wasn't working, but it was still a generation where I was somewhat buying games, birthdays, presents, and then as I started working part-time. So I look at PS3, look at PS4, and look at PS5, and sometimes I look, I'm like, all right, how do I compare versus where I was with PS4? In terms of how many games that I have at this period of time. Am I playing more games? Am I playing less games? Am I buying more digital than I am physical? What does that look like? And I think I've found that I'm pretty consistent. I think I always, like, PS4 I had netted out to about 100 physical games. And I'm not the type to buy, like, every game I've purchased are games I've purchased, played, and wanted. Like, I'm not going into a store now and buying 30 PS4 games for $10. So these are, like, purchased day one. And I think I'm kind of on a similar trajectory with PS5, but you're a bit more agnostic, right? You'll play on PC, you'll play on 64, you'll play on anything, right? So how do you see your transition, if there is one, from when you were, buying on PS4, Xbox, when we were both working retail, versus now? Are you playing a bit more digitally? What's that look like?
So I've actually got my almost entire collection of games online on a website. So I use a website called Backloggery, which have just undergone a huge renovation in terms of being able, like, they've changed the whole website, so it's a lot more user friendly. Anyway,
is there an app? Before we get into is there an app? Because I think we've had the conversation. I was like, I kind of want to know.
There's a semi-Android app, like you could basically download the website. It's a web, it's a website, and so you can have it on your phone if needed. But otherwise, I jump on the computer, looking at my Backloggery now, because I just went through over the last couple of days all my Steam games, and I added them all. So my total games that I have owned or own total is 3,181.
Wild.
Right? So that's a lot.
Yeah. And
Now,
that, just to be clear, that includes all consoles,
at everything.
free PlayStation Plus games, free Xbox Gold
Free
games,
Epic Game Store games, like Epic Game
so
Launchers.
every game you've literally owned or yeah, okay.
Yeah, formerly owned everything.
Yeah,
Everything.
okay. Yeah.
There's a couple that I feel like I'm still missing. Like maybe there's some Game Boy Advance games hiding somewhere, so I'll get to that at some stage. But I've gone through it all. So yeah, 3,181 is what I've got. I've got 5 games that I'm currently playing at the moment. And out of those 5 games, all 5 are digital.
Interesting. What
All
are those
5.
5 games, just for people's...
So I've got a couple of browser games. So Pirate Clan and Mob Wars La Cosa Nostra. They're games owned by Kano Play. So if anybody remembers Mafia Wars on Facebook,
Oh my god, yeah.
it's similar to that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm pretty sure because that was Zynga, which is now owned by Microsoft. Funnily enough, but so it's similar to sort of that. Another one is Cernia, which is basically a waiting game. There's old school RuneScape and there's Helldivers 2. Now Helldivers 2 I bought digitally because I didn't want to wait for a physical copy, and I was like, around it was about 2015, 2016. I was like, look, I'm not gonna buy digital games unless they're gonna be ongoing games. So games like The Division, Plants vs Zombies, Garden Warfare 2, online games, Destiny 2, online games
Yep.
that I can jump in for a little bit and jump out. For your single player games, I would buy physical, so that way I could finish it and get rid of it.
Yep.
And so that's kind of changed my outlook on how I look at my games. And when I go through my list, like even Xbox One, which includes the free games with Game with Gold, and the physical games that I've had and primarily sold as well, I've only got, I think, 4 or 5 of them remaining. That's 275 games.
Wild. I was actually going to ask you on that point.
Yeah. That's not even
And
Game
we're
Pass,
talking
by the
about-
way. Game Pass is 103. That's on its own separate thing.
As we move into this digital era, does that worry you? Like the idea that you currently play in that space where you purchase, trade. If that goes away, you feel like you're going to be lacking? You feel like you're going to miss out on more games than you would have not if you could have continued that?
At the end of the day, no. And the reason...
More of a nice to have.
Yeah, the reason being is that I've got such a large backlog of, old school games. So, like, for example, behind me, I've got my GameCube games, I've got PS2 games, and then over on the other end, I've got, like, Wii, Xbox, Wii U, all this sort of stuff. And I've got these physical games, and I'm starting to play through some of them because I want to be able to, play through the games that I actually own. It's like when you own a library, you want to read through all your books. Same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I've now grown accustomed, especially over the last few years, and probably just before COVID hit, where I was more than happy for digital games to come into my life, whether it's through Game Pass or free services or anything like that. Usually that would be the way to go, to play it, but not get too attached to it because I know it's not mine. I'm renting it, I'm borrowing it, whatever. I don't care. And I've been able to kind of detach myself away from that, which some people would, when you purchase a game that's $125 and you buy Stellar Blade and you're like, all right, this is going to be my game, and then you play Stellar Blade for a month, 2 months, or Elden Ring or whatever it may be, and that becomes your game because you bought that. And I have that sort of feeling, but with all of these older games. So
Yeah.
the newer games, I'm like, look, okay, Hellblade, I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Because I have the ability to be able to give it a go.
That's the thing. It's the choice is like, I mean, even me, would I question buying physical copies of PlayStation games if they had a subscription that launched day and date? I don't know. But I personally still enjoy going into a store and picking up a copy. I still like the experience. As much as it is a lot easier to have the game preloaded and whatever.
Yeah.
I still have that experience where I go, the guy at EB knows me. we'll chat for 5-10 minutes, and then he's usually asking me questions, and I'm like, well, you work here, but anyway,
Yeah.
I still kind of like that. I'm a person where I have to be in a mood to play something, and depending on where the thing is, actually dictates if I'll be in the mood to play it. So even with Hellblade, as much as I was, I gave the game a 7, was enjoying it. I still had to go. Ugh, I had to turn on the PC. Got to sit in this chair again.
I'm still not in the mood to play Last of Us. I think I played about 20 minutes the other week, and I'm still not in the mood to it. The game came
Yeah.
out in 2013. I'm
Yeah.
still not in the mood to play it. Whereas I'll look at Forspoken physically for $9 on PS5, and I'll say, yeah, all right, I'll buy that.
Yeah.
I'll play that at some stage.
So I think that has something to it too, where I put more value on something I have physically and tend to spend more time on it. That's why it kills me. Like Alan Wake 2 is only digital. I'm like, man, I'd love to have that game in my collection because that's a game
I bought it digital.
really...
Haven't touched
Well,
it.
it only came out digitally,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's one where it's like, damn, if that came out physically now, I'd probably buy it just to have it in my collection. And that's the last point I want to go to as we wrap up. Game sales, right? And we spoke about Hellblade 2 and if we expected that to set the world on fire commercially, and I said no, and I think you agreed. Alan Wake 2 was another big AAA game that launched last year, and that was digital only. And really, at the moment, it's still quite rare that games will do that in that AAA space. They mostly still will launch physically. Now, Alan Wake 2 is reportedly not setting the world on fire and hasn't made back the money for its development from Remedy. Question I've got for you: do you think the fact that this game was digital only had a part to play in that?
Yes.
Go on, because I'm going to go cough my brains out again.
That's all right. I think that, especially with games that are coming from third-party publishers, so, for example, you look at anything Ubisoft, there'll always be a physical sale and it'll always have something extra, whether it's a statue or a soundtrack or something like that, like some sort of, little token for you to be able to purchase it. And I think Alan Wake 2 didn't really have that. They had, I think, a bonus mission or like a power... Or they had something as part of like a special edition.
Yeah, it had like something to do with Epic.
Yeah, like a gift card or a percentage off a game or something like that. But if Alan Wake 2 had a physical release and there was an opportunity to get, like letters of some of the characters or some little trinket, I think that...
Or even just a physical copy on a shelf would make a difference.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the stage now where with physical releases, unless it's a game that's like an indie darling that's, Australian-wise between, $30 to $50 or something like that, if it's going to be your AAA games, you've got to have a selling point for it. Now, for a lot of games like Call of Duty and FC 24, or formerly known as FIFA, you don't really need that selling point. They're going to buy the game every year. Fair enough. But for other games that come out, like your Assassin's Creed that comes out, yeah, you can buy the digital version of the game. It's a single-player game. You might get some bonus stuff. Or you get the physical one and you get, an illustration book. You get a statue. You get a soundtrack. You get something else. Like there's these incentives to get you to buy that physical one. And I think, especially when you're trying to market to people who want to have something physical that shows their ownership of the game, that's going to be the driving factor. For people who don't care anymore, the digital copy is going to be the way to go.
The question I had though was, because I agree, I think there is a part that the physical, like as in the special editions, have to play, but I also think just having a physical copy on the store makes a difference too. So the question I had was, because I remember having those conversations when people would come in, and I don't know if you still have that today, where they'd be like, "Oh, what's new? Like, what do you recommend?"
Yep.
I don't know. And you'd walk into the section and be like, "Oh, well, here's all the new releases," and I could go, "All right, this is good, this is good, this is great. I recommend this." But would you recommend Alan? Like, you walk over to that section and you look at the new releases. Would Alan Wake 2 even come into your mind? Probably not, because it's not there to recommend, and it's kind of like, "Oh, I'd recommend playing this. Do you sell it?" No, it's digital. You just have to go home and download it. Like, I think there is a role that that plays. I don't know how big.
I know what you mean. I think, like, you've got to keep in mind, especially games that are coming out nowadays, there's a lot, like, even on Switch, for example, it's no longer a disc. It's a code. So, when you say physical release, I disagree. I think physical presence. If you've
Yeah.
got physical presence, the poster of Alan Wake 2 or the picture, even if we're selling a digital code of the game, that is going to do the same amount as just selling it as a disc. Because even though people are buying it as a digital game, that you're still able to take them over to the section and talk about that.
The question I have to that though is like, as a retailer, why would you, unless you're getting a cut of it, you know what I mean? Because it's like, well, why would we want you advertising something we can't sell you?
You don't. And as a retailer, it doesn't like as a worker in a retail, it doesn't matter what you're
No,
selling.
I
Like
know, I know.
like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Yeah, okay, business acumen might say, you want something that has the highest profit margin. In which case, you're looking at not necessarily special editions. You're not looking at games. You're looking at merchandise. If you
Yeah.
are not selling Alan Wake 2, but you're selling Alan Wake pillows, that's where you're going to get your money.
Well, to the point that we talked on today, right? Like 70% digital on PlayStation, 80, 90% on Xbox. Like maybe I'm overestimating. It's funny. It's like I nearly have this gut feeling that the physical disc provides some sort of value that you can't quantify. Like it just gives this. I don't know. I don't know. And it's something you can't really prove out. And maybe Alan Wake 2 was just destined to not sell. Which breaks my heart.
I
Because
still
Alan
think
Wake
it's a
2 's
niche game.
It is. I mean, it is. But man, if you haven't played Alan Wake 2 or the first one, like, I don't know. I think I told the story on a previous version of this podcast, but I played the first Alan Wake. I was at the end of the first Alan Wake when my wife went into labor, and she was in early labor, and I'm like, well, do you want to go to the hospital? She's like, no, well, not yet. Like, you don't want to be those people. It's like you're literally in early labor. So I have this like vivid memory of the game, like I'm finishing Alan Wake 1 and I can hear my wife in the other room going through labor. And I'm like, I'm coming. I'm just gonna defeat the darkness first.
Yeah, but is that because you bought it physically? Is that why you have that connection? No.
No, well, that one unfortunately I couldn't try. There was a Alan Wake because if you remember, Alan Wake was a 360 exclusive.
Yeah.
It never came to PS3, and then there was a hard to find physical version that I do eventually want to get, but then I was like, I can't get the sequel anyway, and my oh, I can't talk. My collection wouldn't be complete. But Alan Wake's it just holds a special place because my wife is literally in labor in the other room screaming, and I'm like, got the torchlight out and the gun, and I'm trying to kill the shadow.
Well,
Um,
to be on your point regarding like the physical and digital sales and what that means for a brick and mortar store, at the end of the day, you want presence. And for a lot of the time nowadays, it's less about having the actual game there as part of its presence. It's now about the merchandise. So you'll have a Pokemon section, you'll have an Assassin's Creed section, you'll have a Minecraft section. You may not have any copies of the game, but that's okay because people are after the merchandise.
Yeah,
That's the seller.
and I wonder, in addition to that, as we move into this cross media world, how important will it be to have a TV show? How important will it be to have a movie or have something else alongside your game?
People are asking for Fallout 4.
Yeah, that's a whole different story. It's like apparently they weren't under the impression that the show would do so well, and that's why it was kind of like launched all at once.
Yeah, and they had no kind of follow up, no plan for marketing
Yeah,
or
they're like,
anything
what
like
are we
that. It's
gonna
like,
do?
yeah,
Yeah.
show's coming. Here you go. It's Fallout. See you later.
Have you got a new game to announce alongside? We got a patch, but anyway, we'll see. There might be I think there's rumors of a Fallout 3 remake or remaster of.
I heard New Vegas as well.
Potentially New Vegas, and we'll find that out.
Well,
in the
Obsidian was the
weeks.
one who did it, right? Who owns Obsidian?
I know. Microsoft. It's wild. That's wild. But we're gonna do a lot of Xbox talk probably over the next week or so. We'll probably most likely do some sort of a prediction show for the Xbox Showcase in June. Summer Games Fest, Jeff Keighley's show will be on. Still waiting for a PlayStation event, showcase, state of play or something. I mean, the rumors are it's happening this week, but I'm like, it's now Monday in Australia. So if it's not announced tomorrow, which will be Monday in the US, maybe it's happening in June. I don't know. But they've got so much to show. There's rumors of Astrobot. There's rumors of, a whole bunch of things.
Don't forget about the
So-
Switch 2.
There's the Switch. So we've got a lot to be excited for if you're a fan of gaming on all platforms. And if you only play on a few, well, some of their games are coming to others anyway, so there is that. But we will wrap up. Sean, any closing thoughts, anything you wanted to say as we exit for this week?
So I think one of the things that we want to keep an eye on right now is we are coming into the Christmas season of gamers. So over the next month or so, this is where usually E3 would be there, but this is where we have our Xbox showcase that's coming out. PlayStation will have theirs. There will be a Nintendo one. We know it's going to happen. It's just about when they announce it and all that sort of stuff. But now's the time to really take a step back and look at what is their plan for the next 6 to 12 months. Because that's going to really affect what we do, what we talk about. Is that going to be our physical digital games breakdown? Is there going to be a new console on the way? Is there going to be changes to the subscription services? How is this going to affect us as players, not just consumers? So it's an interesting time. So if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe this video and this channel, so that way you can get all the latest updates.
And that 100% correct. And we do also talk about the other platforms. It's just funny that, you know, we had Hellblade this week. Last week we did the, you know, if we were at the heads of Xbox, what we would do. And if you haven't checked that out, please do. But PlayStation have literally done nothing. So there isn't too much to talk about there. And Nintendo are just quietly successful, launching Paper Mario and making millions of dollars. Theme parks, movies, the rest. But this has been this week's Busy Playing Something. I've been your host. Sean will be in the hosting chair back next week as we do our next episode. Again, you can find us on Spotify for the time being. Soon to be on other podcast feeds. YouTube, of course, will be the home of Busy Playing Something. Twitter, at Holy Prawn, at Joshua LaRosa. Links will be below. Anything else? I think that's it. I think go in God's graces. Touch some grass. What's the thing in Elden Ring?
Oh, I don't
touch
know.
some grace. Touch some grace. Go touch some grace. Play Alan Wake 2. Long live the Vita. God help us. Goodbye.
You got a few there, yeah.